loud, so everyone hears. He snatched McKenna's phone and threw it into the swimming pool as his sisters recorded every second, and his mistress smiled. You never deserved him, she sneered. McKenna said nothing. They mistook her silence for weakness. Moments later, a black car rolled through the gates, and every eye turned toward it. If you've ever been underestimated by the very people who should have loved you, stay with me. Watch what happens when the woman they broke turns out to be the one holding everything. Tap that subscribe, because this story is going to hit somewhere real. The party had lights strung across the whole backyard. Gold ones, the kind you rent when you want strangers to think you're rich. Marcus loved lights like that. He loved anything that made people look at him. And that night, under all that borrowed gold, he looked like a king. But a king of what? That was the question nobody at that party thought to ask. McKenna moved through the crowd quietly, the way she always did. She refilled a glass here, she smiled at a cousin there. She wore a simple dress, no jewelry that shouted. People walked past her like she was staff. Some of them thought she was. Her husband stood by the pool with a drink in his hand, telling a story that made everybody laugh. It was a story about her, about how she didn't understand his world, about how he carried the whole household. The guests laughed because he was the host, and you laugh at the host's jokes. McKenna laughed too, soft, so nobody would feel awkward. Have you ever laughed at a joke that was slowly killing you? She had, for 9 years. Her sisters were the loudest, Adeaze and Nia, 2 women who had never worked a day the way McKenna worked, but who spoke about her like she was a charity case Marcus had picked up off the street. That night, they had their phones out early, filming everything, waiting. You film when you already know something is coming. Remember that. And then there was the other woman, Simone. She stood too close to Marcus, laughed a beat too fast at his jokes, touched his arm like she had a right to it. McKenna had noticed her weeks ago. A wife always notices. But McKenna said nothing, because McKenna had learned a long time ago that silence sees more than screaming ever will. Earlier that evening, before the cruelty, there was a small moment. You almost wouldn't notice it. A young waiter, nervous, spilled a tray of drinks near the pool. Glass everywhere. The boy froze, terrified he'd be fired on the spot. The sisters rolled their eyes. Marcus started to snap at him. But McKenna was already there, kneeling in her simple dress, picking up glass with her bare hands, telling the boy that it was fine, that everybody drops a tray sometime, that he should go get himself some water and come back when he was ready. Nobody clapped for that. Nobody filmed it. Kindness never trends. But I want you to hold on to that picture. The richest person at the party, on her knees, helping the one everyone else looked past. Because in about 10 minutes, the same crowd that ignored her mercy was going to cheer her humiliation. Watch how fast people turn. The trouble started small, the way real trouble always does. McKenna's phone buzzed once in her hand, just once. She glanced down at it and started to step away from the crowd, quiet, toward the house. That was all. But Marcus saw it, and something in him, something drunk and scared and mean, decided that her stepping away was a crime. "Where you going?" he called across the yard, loud. Everybody heard it. Everybody turned. "Just inside," McKenna said. "Who you texting? Huh? Who you always texting?" "Nobody, Marcus." "Nobody," he laughed, but there was no fun in it. "Nobody. You hear that? Nobody." He looked around at his guests, feeding on their attention, needing it. My wife thinks I'm stupid. Now, here is a thing about men like Marcus. They are not cruel because they are strong. They are cruel because they are afraid. And Marcus had been afraid of his wife for a long time without ever understanding why. He just knew that when she looked at him, calm, quiet, unbothered, he felt small. And a small man in front of a crowd will do anything to feel big again. He snatched McKenna's phone out of her hand. "Marcus," her voice stayed level, "give it back." "Beg." He smiled, now wide, ugly. "Beg. Out loud so everyone hears." The yard went quiet, the good kind of quiet for him, the kind where 100 eyes wait to see what a man will do. Somebody should have stopped him. That's what you're thinking, isn't it? 100 grown people standing there, and not one of them stepped in. That's the part nobody likes to admit about humiliation. It needs a crowd, and the crowd almost always lets it happen. A cousin looked at his shoes. A neighbor sipped her drink. Ariaze zoomed her camera in, and Marcus, feeling all those eyes feed him, got bigger and meaner by the second. "You hear me?" he said. "Beg, or does the big silent queen think she's too good?" He didn't know how close he was to the truth. He was mocking her with the exact word that would end him. Isn't that always how it goes? The cruel ones say the true thing by accident and laugh, never knowing. McKenna did not beg. So he threw it. A long, lazy arc through the gold light, and the phone hit the water and sank, the screen glowing pale as it went down. His sisters caught all of it, laughing behind their cameras. Simone stepped up beside him and looked McKenna up and down like she was something spilled on the floor. "You never deserved him," Simone said. And McKenna, soaked at the edge, her whole marriage sinking in 8 feet of chlorine, said nothing. They thought that silence was surrender. They thought a woman with no phone had no power. They thought the game was over. But watch her hands. She's not shaking from fear. And under the water, that pale glowing screen showed a small logo on the lock screen. A logo not one guest at that party recognized, though half the country did. They laughed at a woman worth more than everything they were standing on. The house, the lights, the pool, all of it. But that gate at the end of the driveway was already starting to open. But what happened next, no one at that party saw coming. Let me take you back first, because to understand a quiet woman, you have to know where the quiet came from. Long before the mansion, before Marcus, before the gold lights, there was a small house with a crooked porch and a woman named Isaba sitting on it. Isaba was McKenna's grandmother, and she raised the girl on almost nothing. They were poor, not the kind of poor people pretend to have survived, the real kind. The kind where you learn the price of everything and the value of a few things that can't be priced at all. Grandma Isaba worked with her hands her whole life and never once raised her voice. McKenna used to ask her why. "Why don't you ever yell, Grandma?" Even when people did her wrong, even when the world took from her. And Isaba would just rock in her chair and say, "Baby, a loud woman spends all her fire on noise. A quiet woman keeps hers. You keep yours." A quiet woman is not an empty one. Isaba never said those exact words, but she lived them every day on that crooked porch, and the girl watching her learned them by heart. There was one thing Isaba owned that mattered more than anything else in that house, a brass key on a leather cord, old, worn, smooth from years of a thumb rubbing over it. Makena asked once what it opened, and her grandmother smiled the way old people smile when they're about to tell you something you're too young to understand. "This opens more than doors," Isaba said. "It opens the day people finally see you. Everybody gets one of those days, baby. You just gotta live long enough and quiet enough to reach it. And when it comes, you won't have to say a word. The day will speak for you." Makena was maybe 12. She didn't understand, but she took the key and she wore it, and she never took it off again. She grew up steady, she grew up smart, and she grew up with a hunger that had nothing to do with showing off. While other kids dreamed of being seen, Makena dreamed of building something so solid it wouldn't matter whether anyone saw it or not. She started small, a little service, a few clients, work done so well and so quietly that it spread by whisper. She reinvested every dollar. She told nobody, not because she was ashamed, but because she wanted to know someday whether a man could love the plain version of her before he ever met the powerful one. Let me tell you how hard those first years were, because the ending doesn't mean anything if you don't know the beginning. There were nights the young woman worked until the sky turned gray in a one-room place with a bad heater and a second-hand desk that wobbled. She taught herself everything nobody had ever offered to teach a poor black girl from a cricket porch. She got doors shut in her face. She got laughed out of rooms by men in good suits who assumed she was there to bring the coffee. And every single time she thought of Grandma Isaba rocking on that porch, saying, "Keep your fire, baby. Don't spend it on their doubt." She'd walk out of those rooms, sit in her old car, and let herself cry for exactly 5 minutes. Then she'd wipe her face and get back to work. Have you ever built something with nobody watching, nobody cheering, nobody even believing? That's the loneliest work there is, and it's also the strongest because it belongs to you completely. Nobody handed Makena a thing. She turned that little service into a bigger one, and the bigger one into a company, and the company into something that started swallowing its rivals whole, all while wearing a plain dress and letting the world call her nothing. She learned that the quiet has a strange power. People say too much in front of a woman they think is small. She heard everything. She forgot nothing. And piece by piece, deal by patient deal, the porch girl built something the men in the good suits would one day be terrified of. By the time she met Marcus, she already had more than he would ever guess. But she came to him plain. Simple dress, simple job, she called it. "Consulting," she said, and shrugged, and let him think it was small. And here's the part that hurts. She built it in silence for 9 years while he mocked her at parties. That quiet little consulting job she always waved off, it had become something enormous, something that employed more people than lived in the whole town Marcus grew up in, something whose name moved markets. The porch girl with the brass key had become one of the most powerful people in the country, and her own husband thought she was a housewife who got lucky marrying him. She let him think it. That was the test. She kept waiting for him to love her small self so she could someday surprise him with the big one and watch him be proud. There were signs if he'd wanted to see them. A phone that rang at odd hours with people who called her by a title he never heard because she always stepped outside to answer. Trips she took alone to see family that put her in cities where enormous deals were quietly closing. A calm about money that a struggling housewife could never have. The calm of someone who has never once, not in 9 years, actually worried about the bills he thought he was covering. But Marcus didn't want to see. Do you know why? Because seeing it would have meant admitting she was the strong one, and his whole picture of himself was built on being the one who carried her. Take that away, and what was he? A man living in a house he couldn't afford, holding a marriage together with lies. So he chose blindness. Men do that. They'd rather be fooled than feel small. He never passed the test, and the day was coming when he'd fail it in front of everyone. She kept her secret for love. Soon, love would force her hand. We're getting to the part where it matters most. Stay with me. The party ended the way those things end. Guests slipped away, whispering. The sisters posted their videos and watched the little hearts pile up. Marcus got drunker and meaner, and McKenna went to bed in a house that had stopped feeling like hers a long time ago. But the days after, that's where the real betrayal grew teeth, because Simone had a plan, and the phone in the pool was only the beginning. Let me tell you something true about the outsider. Simone was not there for love. She never had been. She was there because a man Marcus had crossed in business, a rival with a long memory and deeper pockets, had pointed her at Marcus like a weapon. Get close, the rival had told her. Find out what the wife is hiding, because everyone in that world had started to sense that something didn't add up. Marcus spent like a rich man, but earned like a struggling one. His company was bleeding money. So where was the lifestyle coming from? Who was really paying for the gold lights? Simone was supposed to find out. And Simone had her own reasons to do it well. She had grown up poor too, poorer than she ever let on. And she made herself a promise that she would never, ever be poor again. She looked at McKenna's quiet and she didn't see a person. She saw an obstacle between herself and safety. That's how she slept at night. She told herself it was survival. You see how betrayal works when it's real? Nobody thinks they're the villain. Everybody's just scared.
Marcus was scared too. Simone fed that fear like a fire. She leaned close to him one night and whispered the poison she'd been building for weeks. "She's hiding money from you," Simone said. "Why do you think she's always on that phone? She's got accounts you've never seen. She's planning to leave you and take everything." "A woman that quiet? She's not simple, Marcus. She's calculating." And the terrible thing is, Simone was almost right. McKenna did have accounts he'd never seen. She was calculating, but not to rob him, to protect what she'd built from the very people now circling her. Marcus believed the lie because he needed to, because believing it made him the victim instead of the fool, because it's easier to hate a woman than to admit she was always more than you. The sisters joined the hunt. Adaeze cornered Marcus in the kitchen one afternoon. "You need to move fast," she told him. "Get the house in your name. Get her to sign over that little business of hers before she wakes up and lawyers up. Do it while she's still quiet." Nia nodded along, and their mother, Mama Dolores, a woman with a face like a closed door, said only one thing from her chair: "Do it clean." That was the family. That was the blood Marcus trusted over his own wife. And here's a moment that should have warned them, if any of them had a conscience left to warn them. One night, McKenna came downstairs for water and heard them in the sitting room, all of them, laughing about her. She stood in the dark hallway and listened to her husband describe her as a slow woman I felt sorry for. She heard Adaeze say she was never one of us. She heard Simone laugh that quick, hungry laugh, and she heard her mother-in-law, the woman who'd sat at McKenna's own table for 9 holidays, say, "Once the papers are signed, put her out." Put her out, like a dog, after 9 years. McKenna didn't cry in that hallway. She just stood very still, memorizing every voice. Because a woman who has been quiet her whole life has one gift the loud will never understand. She remembers exactly who showed her their teeth, every single one of them. They were writing their own ending in that room, and not one of them knew it. They planned to strip her bare. They planned to make her sign her own life away and thank them for the pen. And McKenna? For a while, she broke. Don't let anyone tell you the strong don't crack. She sat alone in the dark of that big, empty house, the brass key pressed into her palm so hard it left a mark, and she asked herself the question that had been chasing her 9 years. Had she stayed quiet too long? Had all her patience, all her silence, all her waiting to be loved for the small version of herself, had it just taught these people that she was theirs to erase? She disappeared on purpose, and now she wasn't sure how to be seen. She went numb. She stopped eating much. She moved through the days like a ghost in her own home while they plodded around her, smiling. There was one night that was the lowest of all. She stood in the bathroom at 3 in the morning, looking at a stranger in the mirror. A woman who ran boardrooms full of powerful men couldn't remember the last time her own husband had said something kind to her. And for a long, terrible moment, she thought about it, about giving up, about signing the papers, about letting them have it all just to make the hurting stop. That's how heavy it got. You've had a night like that, haven't you, where the easiest thing in the world would be to just disappear for good. And then her hand closed around the brass key at her throat, and she heard her grandmother's voice as clear as if Esaba was standing in the room. It opens the day people finally see you. You just have to live long enough and quiet enough to reach it. McKenna looked at the woman in the mirror one last time, and slowly something came back into her eyes. Not rage, something steadier than rage. She dried her face. She stood up straight. The morning was over. The reckoning was about to begin. But numb is not the same as finished. And here's the thing they forgot. You can take a woman's phone. You can't take her mind, and you can't take the people out in the world who answer only to her. There was a line they didn't know about, an old burner kept for exactly the kind of day her grandmother had promised would someday come. Late one night, McKenna picked it up. She dialed one number, and when the man on the other end answered, she said only 4 words, in a voice so calm it should have frightened everyone in that house. It's time. Come home. She'd spent 9 years disappearing. She had one night left to be seen. Marcus, being Marcus, couldn't just take everything in private. He needed an audience. He always needed an audience. So he staged it. He called it a reconciliation dinner. A chance to start fresh, he told her, with that smile that used to fool her. Really, it was a trap dressed as a peace offering. He invited the family. He invited a lawyer. He even invited Simone, who came in a red dress like the mistress had ever been the wife. There were a few guests, too, and a couple of cameras, because if a man is going to break a woman, men like Marcus want it documented. They sat around a long table, candles, the good plates, and in front of McKenna's seat, a folder of papers. The house, the accounts, and a line buried in the legal language that would sign away every piece of the company she'd built, all of it sliding across the table into his hands. Marcus pushed the folder toward her and leaned back, king of his gold-lit castle. "Sign," he said, "and I'll let you keep your dignity." The sisters had their phones up. Simone smiled her small smile. Mama Dolores watched with those closed-door eyes. McKenna looked at the papers. She looked at the pen, and she did not pick it up. "Marcus," she said quietly, "do you know what I do for a living?" He laughed. "Consulting, little consulting. Sign the paper." "I'm going to ask you one more time to think about that question, because after tonight, you're never going to get to ask it again." That was when the headlights hit the windows. A black car rolled up the long driveway and stopped. Every head at that table turned. Marcus's smile flickered, just for a second, because he didn't recognize the car, and a man like him hates a thing he can't place. The door opened. A man stepped out, tall, calm, in a dark suit, carrying a slim case. He walked up to the house and inside like he'd been there 1,000 times, and he did not so much as glance at Marcus. He walked the length of that long table, past the sisters, past Simone, past the lawyer, and he stopped behind McKenna's chair. Marcus found his voice. "Who are you?" "That's my driver. I don't—" "No, sir," he said, without heat. "My name is Obi, and I don't work for you." He set the slim case down beside McKenna and inclined his head to her, the way you bow to someone you have served for years. "Chairman," he said, "everything's ready." Chairman. The word landed in that room like a stone in still water. The sisters' phones lowered an inch. The lawyer's face went pale, because the lawyer, unlike the family, actually read the business pages, and the lawyer had just realized whose table he was really sitting at. McKenna rose from her chair, slowly, and something in her had changed, or rather, something she'd been hiding for 9 years finally stood up straight. The quiet was still there, but now you could feel the weight underneath it. She reached up and drew the leather cord from under her collar, the brass key, her grandmother's key. She fit it into the lock of the slim case Obi had set down, and she turned it, and it opened. This opens the day people finally see you. And inside were the papers that told the truth. Let me explain something to everyone at this table, since my husband was kind enough to gather you all in one place. She slid the first document out. This company my husband calls my little consulting job. I built it, alone, over 9 years while he told rooms full of people that I didn't understand his world. She set it down. I understand his world better than he does, because I own a piece of it he never knew existed. She slid out the second. 2 years ago, Marcus's company was drowning. Quietly, a holding group bought the debt and kept it breathing. Marcus thought it was a miracle. Investors, he said. Angels. She looked at him. I was the angel, Marcus. The roof over your head, this table, these plates, the gold lights you love so much. You've been living inside something I built and mocking the woman who built it. Silence. Real silence now. Not his, hers. Adeza found her voice first, and it came out shaking. You're lying. This is some kind of trick. Marcus, she's bluffing. McKenna didn't even look at her. She slid a third document down the table until it stopped in front of the sisters. That's the account your videos were monetized on, the one you've been so proud of. Read the parent company at the top of the page. Take your time. Adeza read it. Adeza went gray, because the name at the top of the page was the same name that had been glowing on a phone at the bottom of a swimming pool. Naya grabbed the paper from her sister's hands, and then she put it down like it had burned her, and neither of them lifted a camera again for the rest of that night. Simone was the next to break. She stood up, half out of her chair, understanding at last that the wife she'd been sent to expose had outthought every one of them months ago, including the rival who'd sent her. That's not possible, Simone whispered. You were sent here to find what I was hiding, McKenna said to her, without anger, which was somehow worse than anger. I let you keep looking. It kept your employer comfortable and blind while I bought the ground out from under him. You did your job beautifully, Simone. You just did it for me. Simone's mouth opened, and nothing came out. That's not possible, she said again, smaller this time. It's not only possible, McKenna said, gently, almost kindly. It's already done. She turned back to Marcus, And this is the part I want you to hear, because she'd waited 9 years to say it, and she said it soft. You told me to beg, out loud, so everyone could hear. She let the words sit. I never needed to beg, Marcus. I owned the room before I walked into it. Marcus tried, the way drowning men try. McKenna, baby, listen. Whatever they told you, whatever you think you heard, we can fix this. You and me, we built this together. We? It was the only time her voice rose, and it rose only an inch. You threw my phone in the pool 3 weeks ago and told me to beg. Tonight, you gathered your family to make me sign my life into your hands. And now that you know whose hands were really holding whose, now it's we? She shook her head slowly. You had 9 years to say we and mean it. You said it for the first time the second you found out I was worth keeping. That's not love, Marcus. That's a man reading a price tag. He had no answer. What answer is there? And the cruelest kindness of the whole night was the simplest one. Marcus finally understood, sitting there in his rented castle, that the fortune he'd mocked, the one he'd called her little pretend money, the one worth more than his whole bloodline would earn in 10 lifetimes, was the only thing that had been keeping him alive. Every dollar he'd sneered at was a dollar holding up the floor beneath his feet. The betrayers fell silent, and the woman they'd tried to erase stood there, dry-eyed, calm, whole. A quiet woman is not an empty one, and this one, it turned out, was full to the very brim. Now, you might expect the part where she screams, where she throws them all out and burns it down and laughs while it burns. That's not who she was, and that's what made it worse for them. The fall came the way she'd built everything, quietly and completely. The holding group called in what Marcus owed, not out of spite, but because it was simply time, and the scaffolding had always been hers to move. The accounts froze. The mansion, which he'd never truly owned, went back to the group that did. The gold lights came down. The cars went away. Piece by piece, the life Marcus had humiliated his wife inside of was revealed to be a thing she had been holding up with one hand the entire time, and she simply, quietly, let go. Simone didn't wait for the end. The moment the money's true owner was known, the moment she understood there was nothing here to steal and nothing to save, she was gone. Her rival backer dropped her the same week. She'd been sent to find the wife's secret, and instead, the wife had found her months ago and let her keep chasing a prize that was never on the table. Simone left with less than she had arrived with, further from the safety she'd betrayed her own soul to reach. That's the thing about selling yourself for security. You always find out too late that the buyer was broke.
The sisters got the worst mirror of all. Those videos they'd filmed by the pool, so proud, so sure, they spread. But the story spread with them now, the whole story. And the internet that had laughed with Ariaze and Nia turned and laughed at them instead. They'd tried to make McKenna the joke. They became it. The comments they used to write about other people were now written about them by the thousands. The friends who'd hearted their cruelty stopped answering their calls. That's the thing about people who only love your status. They leave the moment the status does. Ariaze actually came to McKenna once, months later, all sweetness, asking for just a little help for family. And McKenna looked at the sister-in-law who had said she was never one of us, and she did not yell, and she did not gloat. She just said, "You told me I was never family. I'm only honoring your words." And she closed the door gently.
the way you close a door on a chapter you're finally done reading. And Mama Dolores, the woman with the closed-door face, sat in a much smaller house afterward, in a silence she couldn't rearrange into anything that made her the wronged one. She'd wanted her son to put McKenna out. In the end, it was the family that got put out by nothing more than the truth. For people who lived and breathed status, being ordinary again was its own quiet punishment. No one had to lift a hand. They'd built their whole lives on a lie, and lies don't need pushing. They fall on their own. And McKenna, she did one thing that surprised everyone who knew the whole story. She left Marcus one small thing. Not the mansion, not the fortune, just enough. A modest place, a modest living, the kind of plain life he'd always secretly feared. She signed that mercy herself, and I promise you it stung him worse than ruin would have, because every ordinary morning for the rest of his life, he would have to wake up and know exactly what he'd thrown into that pool. Not a phone, a queen. And she'd let him live just well enough to remember it. She never raised her voice through any of it. Notice that. Not once. Power that has to shout was never really power. Real power can afford to whisper. Obi held the door for her, and McKenna walked out of that house the same way she'd walked through the party, quietly, plainly, with a brass key resting where it belonged. Only this time, everyone was watching. This time, they saw her.
If McKenna's silence taught you anything tonight, let it be this. Never let anyone measure your worth by how loud you are. If this story moved you, hit that like. Tell me in the comments, would you have signed that paper or walked away? And subscribe, because next time, the one they underestimate might just be you. I'll see you in the next story.